Okay, let's start. I see no one else is joining, so you get a private lesson.
All right, sounds good. Just Heidi and I. Wow.
Yeah, very excited, very intimate, very intimate. So I'll turn off my camera in a little bit so you can see, so I can use Sesame. I kind of just a few general notes. So as you're familiar with the Android version, you'll see that Windows is very, very similar. It's a bit simpler with regards to the settings, as in Android, we have to compensate for quite a lot of gestures that you would normally do with your fingers or hands. And in Windows, essentially, we're replacing a mouse, which only has a left click, right click, and then a few other features, which I'll show you, like double click and drag and drop and scroll. But it makes everything a lot simpler. Also, since in most cases you'll be using a much stronger device, most of the computers would be stronger than the Android tablet or phone that you would be using, the whole experience is much smoother, and also the range in which the camera would pick up a face. I'll show you that as well. Take into account that because I will, at least at the beginning, I'll be using a lot of bandwidth, because I'll be showing you what's happening on my side of the screen as well as sharing my screen itself. So if it is a bit jittery, A, let me know, and B, just know that that's not the experience on my end. That's what happens over the internet. And hopefully in the recording it will come out better. So I am turning off my video. And sharing my screen. So you should be able to see my desktop. Just let me know if you don't. Good. And
Yeah, we got it.
Perfect. Now to start Sesame, all I have to do is double click on the icon. And the first screen that kind of disappeared there is the sign-in screen. So the first time you ever use Sesame for Windows, you have to register, sign in as a new user, and then you get your 7-day free trial. And if you have an account already, you simply sign in, and the license is automatically updated on that device within Sesame. So you can see already that it has already found my face. It's tracking me as I move around. If I move back, it'll still pick me up. So even if I'm in a wheelchair, very far away from the computer, it'll still track me no matter where I am on the screen. And we'll get to that further on. But this provides a lot of flexibility, including in cases where the person might move or slouch in their wheelchair, or someone might have bumped into them. No matter where they are, or almost no matter where they are, we'll pick them up again and they'll be able to control freely. Before I start the tracking, just to show you the basic settings and what it looks like. We won't go over everything, but then you can feel free to ask questions if you want. So first of all, in the About, you can see the version number, and you can start the Getting Started guide, which is the first thing you see when you run Sesame for the first time after installation. Very similar to our new Android Getting Started guide, almost identical. You can see a video of what it looks like. I don't think it'll go through. There we go. So you can see what it looks like to start the tracking and moving the mouse. You can try it yourself in a simple game. You can see how clicking is done and try it on your own. And then a basic explanation on the difference between the basic menu and the advanced menu, which I'll get to in a minute. But this is the experience you would get getting started with Sesame after the first time you run it. Within the settings, there are 3 simple tabs. The account shows you details, whether you're active or not, and which email is associated with the license. System gives you kind of the background control, so you can control what it what the timer looks like, whether or not to see your face in the background when the tracking starts. We'll start with it and then I'll turn it off just so you get a better experience of Sesame. You can assign keyboard shortcuts to the different tracking options: start tracking, restart tracking, and stop tracking. So this can be an actual keyboard shortcut, or it could be a switch that would do it. So if someone is nonverbal and still wants an independent way of starting the tracking, so they can do it with a keyboard, or they can do it with a switch. Down below, you can see under interaction, replace dwell with. This is for cases where someone is using an AAC application and they want to use the native dwell within that AAC application. And then you would replace it with something, or you can assign a switch to it and that will perform a left click instead of waiting for the timer. This essentially cancels the timer and allows you to choose something else that would perform the action. If you're interested in seeing how Sesame works with AAC, let me know and I'll show you this in a little bit. The rest are the voice commands, which you can enable, and then you can control Sesame with voice commands similar to Android, just without the whole OK Google part in the voice commands. And of course, my phone turned on. And then the two last settings are automatically detect face. I'll get to that in a little bit. This allows you to manually track anything similar to Android. You'll see it's super simple, and we remember what was the object that you assigned for tracking. So we have people using they can't move their head, but they use their chin as a method of control, or a finger, a single finger that can move around. You can even use your eyebrow to do that. Basically anything. I'll show you an example for that in a little bit. And then the control tab is even more similar to Android. If you recall the sensitivity, there's the possibility of measuring sensitivity automatically and letting Sesame choose the optimal settings. Control mode, absolute is the regular one. Adaptive, which also exists on Android, provides even more control for someone that has super limited head movement. And I'll show you that as well. Timers, same as Android. And you can choose how you interact with the screen. So you can use it only for clicking, and then you would choose always click. That performs a left click. Very useful for using it with AAC applications or education software, or basic applications that only require tapping. You can choose if you want the basic or advanced menu, which I showed before. And the dwell click region is something that gives you a bit more flexibility in cases of high sensitivity. Heidi, I think we even discussed this in one of our calls, that when someone has a very, very high sensitivity for the tracking, they may have a hard time tapping or clicking because the cursor jitters and they find it hard to hold it still. So this separates the two issues. So you can define the sensitivity, and then the size of the dwell region essentially says how large of an area they can play around in, and will still treat it as though they're holding still. Does that make sense? Was that clear?
Yeah, we're with you.
All right, perfect. Don't be afraid to interject and let me know if I lose you at any point. So I'll start with the true basics. You'll see me in the background, and then I'll cancel that just so you see me better. But you can see me in the background. You can see that as I move, the cursor moves around as well. This is without adjusting the settings, just taking the default settings. When I pause, I get the basic menu with a left click and a right click and a cancel, or no action. Well, very similar to Android. You can see how smooth the experience is. And here the timers are slow, just so you have a chance to see it. You have a question? And now I'll let Sesame measure the sensitivity. So very similar to Android. I push the borders to show how much head movement I have. And you can see the numbers change. Now it's a lot easier for me to control the cursor. Okay, are you with me until now?
Yep.
All right. So I'll stop the tracking, use the keyboard shortcut to do that. And I'll show you how what adaptive does. I will turn off seeing my face in the background, and it'll give you a better touch and feel of what it looks like. And for purposes of demonstration, I'll take the sensitivity up very high. And now I'll let you see, I'll leave this window open so you can see exactly how I'm moving around. So do you see the rectangle on the bottom left? Traveling around. This is my control area. So if I have very, very limited head movement, as you can see, that's not the case. I can nudge this rectangle to where I want to perform the action. And then within it get the absolute control. It's a bit hard to demonstrate with the range of motion I have. And if I take the sensitivity down lower, you can see that that rectangle is much bigger. But this will allow me, even with very, very, very small head movement, to reach all sides of the screen. I'll show you another example of it. This time with the manual tracking. So I'll turn off the automatically detect face. Now I no longer want Sesame to automatically detect my face. I want to choose myself what to track. So, sorry. So Sesame is waiting for me to choose what to track. Let's choose my chin, for instance, which obviously moves quite a lot less than my head. And then I start the tracking. You can see immediately I get control. You can see the cursor continues to move even though I'm not moving my chin that far. So again, the difference, and it's exactly the same with Android. In absolute, the cursor goes, if I move my head now, you'll see the cursor goes wherever I go. In adaptive, it continues moving in the direction I'm pointing to until I stop it. And then I can perform the action. So this gives me a solution for someone who has very limited head movement or chooses to track something that doesn't have as much range of motion.
So let me ask, so the main feature of this is that it keeps moving until you tell it to stop. So
correct.
You can get further with less movement. Is that essentially what's happening?
Yes, correct.
Okay, all right.
That's exactly what's happening. What the rectangle represents is that within that area, that's the area where you control it in absolute. And outside of it is where the cursor would move until you stop it. It basically represents how much range of motion you have with relation to the screen.
Okay.
Okay? But you described it correctly. It's kind of like outside of those borders, you control it like a joystick. So the cursor continues moving until you stop it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So usually you would use absolute. Adaptive would be for cases with very limited range of motion. So I'll turn on the advanced menu and I'll show you what that includes. I'm leaving this screen on just so you can see what I'm doing while I'm demonstrating. So I'll start the tracking this time with a keyboard shortcut.
We don't have this.
And now I'll turn on, or I'll hold so you can see the menu.
It's a different product.
And you have a left click, which allows also repeat click or repeat left click and double click. So you can go into, similar to Android, you can go into an always click mode for typing or dialing or using a specific application that only requires clicking. Double click, which is very useful in Windows. The right click gives you a right click, which is the Windows menu in relation to where you clicked it. So if I want to rename a shortcut, get the menu, I can choose rename. And then let's say I want to choose repeat tab because I'm going to type the name. Then I can pop up the on-screen keyboard and type whatever I want. When I'm done, I go up here. If you recall, in Android, you would look to the left to release the always click mode. Here, you simply go to the top, and this could be moved as well. And I'm back to full control. So we covered left click and right click. We also have a drag option. And similar to Android, I can drag once or I can repeat drag. This will allow me to move objects, to start a marquee, similar to holding a left click on a mouse and drag. The next option is scrolling, exactly what it sounds like. On the old mice, it was the wheel in the center of the mouse between the two buttons, or clicking both buttons and moving the mouse. Same here, you get to scroll, obviously very useful for websites, reading, etc. And the system, which allows to reposition. So let's say, for instance, I started slouching. I have a hard time getting to the top of the screen. I can tell Sesame to reposition. It'll pick up my new location. And now I don't have a problem reaching the top of the screen. So again, almost identical to Windows in that sense. So if I slouch even more, you can see I'm really having a hard time. But in this case, I'm having a hard time popping open the window, the action selection dialog. Or perhaps I'm using the basic action selection dialog, and so I don't have an option to reposition. So I can use one of my keyboard shortcuts or the switch I defined to reposition. I can use a voice command to reposition, or I can take my head completely off screen. Sesame tells me it lost me. It shows me where I was. You can see I'm lower than where I was before, which is the reason I can't reach the top of the screen. And if I don't get back to that previous position, Sesame will restart the tracking automatically and center it. So now I can reach the top of the screen, even from my new location. Up to here, was everything? Does anything require clarification?
No, I think we're right with you. So yeah, it's very similar in a lot of ways to the Android product, just different set for PC now, so.
Right, and there's something, again, I mentioned this before, because of the quality of the device, in this case it's a Surface Pro 6, and the camera, which is better and stronger, the overall experience is much smoother. It'll be similar to the experience on a very high-end device in Android.
Yeah, so I presume, of course, you're using the webcam that's probably built into a laptop, but if you don't have a webcam, do you have suggestions on what ones work best?
Not really. We developed this version on a very, very old computer with a very old external webcam on purpose to make sure that we can accommodate a very large range of devices and camera qualities. As I always say with Android, the better the device, the better experience. But you can buy a $15 webcam and it'll still work.
Okay.
So it's really up to you. Most of the devices, when we talk about education, for example, they usually get Surfaces or Lenovo Yogas. All of the laptops today have built-in webcams.
Yeah.
So you're all set with that. So the only question would be for desktops.
Yeah.
On desktop, some of the screens come with a built-in camera. And if not, then any simple from your local Amazon website or local video or computer supplies provider would be good enough. You don't
Okay.
need a gaming crazy camera to do that.
All right.
Other interesting settings. So I talked about the dwell region. I think this is probably one of the most useful features we have here to accommodate for people with very high sensitivity, that require very high sensitivity. I'll put my face in the background again. So again, hopefully it won't be too jittery. And I'll show you what this means. So I'll leave this screen on. And I'll start the tracking. Now, if I take the dwell region setting all the way down, you can see that it's going to be a bit hard for me to tap because the cursor keeps moving and so you don't see a timer. Can you see that on your end? Even though I'm almost completely still, the cursor keeps bouncing around, and so the timer.
Yeah, it got the jittery. Okay.
And if I take the sensitivity even higher, it'll be even worse. See, I'm not moving, and the cursor is all over the place. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, the user would have an extremely difficult time trying to get the menu to open or to click or anything. So this is what dwell region allows you to do. As I make it bigger, you can see the timer already started. It means that I can move more and still have Sesame consider it as holding still. Where could this be super useful? Let's say we have a child with CP. And they have some head control, but the head control is for exaggerated head movement and not for and they can't hold their head completely still. So they have these small movements. If we want them to be able to control the cursor and click, we take the dwell region relatively high. And now, let me take the sensitivity down a bit. Okay. And so now, even though I'm moving, you can see the timer is still running. If I take the dwell region even higher, I can move even more on the screen to get it to work.
So what's the maximum pixel range all the way at the top? Is it 300?
Yeah,
300.
we go by pixels because there's a big difference in screen size, but just so you get a feeling, and it's also affected by the sensitivity. You can see that I'm moving around quite a bit, and it's still considering it as holding still. And if the sensitivity was higher, I'd even get more control. Okay, so this is something that is, I would say you would look at this in one of two cases. A, if you have someone using in high sensitivity and they have a hard time tapping. Well, one case. If someone has a hard time tapping even though they control the cursor well, this is the setting to play around with. Okay?
Okay.
Was that clear? That sounded like a hesitant, okay.
No, just thinking about it. So no, that's fine.
All right. So essentially, we just about covered everything. I'll talk a little bit about the voice commands and the keyboard and switch access, and then go ahead and shoot at me whatever you want. So keyboard and switch access, in Android, there's the option for use Sesame with a switch. Because we have a keyboard on these computers, and usually people have switches associated with their Windows devices more than they do with their Android phones or tablets, this allows you to either replace, in the case of dwelling, or add another access method for the application. So you have the basic access method to start the application with tapping. You also have a voice command to start the application. But maybe that's not enough. Maybe you're nonverbal and obviously you can't use your hands, or you can't reach the keyboard to click a key. And in which case you would assign a switch to that keyboard shortcut, and then by clicking that switch, you'd get the tracking to start. And I can even go simpler and just click return. Right, all I have to do is, let's say return and space are the keys I want to use, but you can see the key is already assigned. I can't use space. So let's choose Control Shift.
So how are you making that change? Are you clicking on it and then pressing the key you want on the keyboard?
Correct. Or a combination of keys.
All right.
I'm sorry, that wasn't clear.
That's all right. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend using return, because then if you're typing and you click on the on-screen keyboard, you click return, it'll start the tracking.
Okay.
For example. So you would want some combination of keys that you wouldn't use in normal typing. If I try to put one letter in, it'll let me, but then every time I'll type and click an A, the tracking will start.
Okay, yeah.
Now, in case of starting tracking, it doesn't really matter because I only start the tracking once. So if I'm writing using Sesame and I click on the A, nothing will happen. But if I choose that restart the tracking is also A, which I can, then every time I type and I hit the A, tracking restarts. And that's why I would want a more sophisticated key assignment. And if I'm assigning it to a switch, it doesn't really matter how complicated the key assignment is, the switch does the work anyway. So the default is Control Shift D for starting the tracking.
So if you were using a switch, you would obviously need an interface. So you would set the switch, or what's listed there is whatever the switch activated on the interface, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the switch, but just pull up the switch I have.
Really depends on the interface.
Right. So the switch I have, the Praetorian, already has some keys preset into it.
Yeah.
And so I can choose, for example, numbers from 0 to 4, space, enter, tilde, up the arrows. I can choose volume, home, enter. So I don't even have to program it. I can just choose one of these. So let's say I want to start the tracking with 1. That's enough. Now I only have to put the switch, set the switch to the correct mode. So right now it's on 6. I'll take it to mode 1. And now every time I click the switch, assuming it's linked to my computer, this one isn't, it sends the computer the number 1, which Sesame recognizes as starting the tracking.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So essentially for all 3 of those, you would need 3 switches if you wanted to do them all.
So usually you would assign the same key assignment for starting the tracking, restarting the tracking.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay.
So, this one. But if I try to assign the same key for stopping the tracking, it won't let me because it's already assigned.
Okay.
But since after you start the tracking, you can't start the tracking again anyway, you can use the same keyboard shortcut for restarting the tracking. Okay?
Okay.
And then we get to the voice commands. You can see all the commands, starting Sesame, turning it off, repositioning it, pausing it, and resuming. So I can say Open Sesame, starts immediately. And I can say Pause Sesame. You can see Pause Sesame. Up in the top left, which is where I positioned the pause button, you can see it's on resume.
Uh-huh.
And I just said resume, and so it unpaused it.
So if the computer was booted up and the software wasn't set to auto start from completely closed, would Open Sesame open the software?
So it even heard you say Open Sesame and started. So in that case, are you asking if the computer is locked, if it would work?
Well, kind of if it was off and somebody needed it to, to start up once the computer started up, if it wasn't auto started, how would they get Open Sesame running? Would the voice command allow them to do that, or do they have to click on the icon?
So right now, if I try to say Open Sesame and it wasn't set up to automatically start, so usually we would recommend putting it in the startup menu so it runs.
Okay, all right. That's what I'm getting at. So you still need to put it in the startup menu. Is there a setting within Open Sesame to auto start it on startup, or?
No, that's a good idea. We have it on Android, and we didn't put it here.
Okay, because I know some
That's a good point.
Some similar softwares have that capability. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. We'll just add it here. One setting I didn't touch on is positioning the Sesame toolbar. So I have my pause button here. And if I choose one of the always click or swipe modes, I get here the button that releases them. I can put it anywhere on the screen. So if I'm using a specific application where it's very convenient for me to use the top left corner, but if my application requires me to reach that side of the screen, I might choose to position it elsewhere.
Okay, great.
Then are AAC applications interesting, and see how Sesame interacts with an AAC application?
Yeah.
Okay, so just for the purpose of demonstration, I'll start the Toby Snap and Core first, which is usually very popular. What do you use for AAC on Windows?
Everything.
Okay. So here I have the grid and Snap and Core, but just for the purpose of demonstration. So in Snap and Core, you can choose different access methods. The default one is touch. When you use touch, since you're not touching, and you use Sesame, it will simply tap. Let me just show you. So I start the tracking. And I'll choose repeat left click to make it simpler, and then I can. Oh, sorry. This first. It's like why? Sorry. Stuck inside the settings.
Oh.
All right, there we go. some reason it's paused. No time. Oh, I know what. Sorry. Sorry, my fault. So right now the access method isn't touch. It is touch. Why is that? Here we go. Okay, so now I'm just using Sesame for the tapping. But let's say we have a child or a user that is used to the native dwell mechanism on snap and core. Let's say they had eye gaze in the past and they're used to how it works on eye gaze. In this case, I can tell snap core, it works the same in every AAC. I can tell them that now the access method isn't touch, but rather their own mouse dwell. Okay?
Okay.
And then in Sesame, I can cancel the dwell. So I simply go to System, replace dwell with, doesn't really matter what I put here. Now there are no timers anymore. And when I start the tracking, doesn't remember the settings, so you have to restart when you change the access method. There we go. So now you can see this is the dwell interface on snapping core. So you see it lights up the keys.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And there are no timers because I canceled them. And so on.
Okay.
Okay, so this gives you the flexibility of using the whatever application it is, own dwell interface or to use Sesame. It's
Okay,
pretty
good to know.
What else?
So are you offering this on a subscription purchase plan, kind of like the Android version?
No, similar to the organizational license we have for Android, we offer it for a one-time fee.
How much is it?
So the official price is $1,000. Now we're offering it for $699. And if you already have an Android account, you can pay an additional $300 and you'll get the Windows version.
Oh, so if you have Android, it's $300, and if you don't, it's $699 if you get it for just PC.
Correct. And if you want to get both together, you get it for $1,000, which is exactly different.
All right, but there's no monthly subscription where they can subscribe to this like the Android version where it's...
Correct. Correct. Windows isn't as subscription based as Android, and so we don't offer it as well.
What's the reason for that?
I don't know what the right answer for that is. I think Windows simply evolved as a one-time payment environment, opposed to mobile where you download. If you think of it, in Windows, you don't download applications daily and you don't replace applications that often, and applications you pay for usually use from then on. As opposed to a mobile device, which is very mobile, and you change a lot of the way, a lot of the things you use on it, sometimes on a daily basis. And then a subscription makes more sense. When we came out with the Windows version, we looked for anything parallel that allows a subscription. We couldn't find anything, and when we spoke to users, it was more natural for them on Windows to pay a one-time fee rather than to commit to a subscription. Having said that, for organizations, if that simplifies their process in any way, then we can, technically, we can do it. So that's not the limitation,
All right.
Technical side.
All right. So, all right. So this is, we have the Open Sesame for Android. So if we were to get this, I think we have a donated copy of the Android, or did we buy that?
No, we bought it.
We bought it.
No, you bought it. You bought it.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes I lose track of how and what we got. Okay.
If you get that many donations, it's probably a good sign.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, that's good.
Yeah. Looks like another good option. Thank you very much for your time walking us through it today. So.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Coffee's on you next time.
Okay. All right. All right. Take care, Rowee. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Have a great one. Bye-bye.